What's up, everyone? We're back. Welcome to Doctorally Unhinged.
I'm Dr. Maxfield.
And I'm Dr. Shah, and welcome to the most exciting episode we've ever had. I'm actually a little bit under the weather.
Oh, no.
So I'm trying to maintain this false energy right now. But we'll, of course, do our product of the day. We're going to talk about this article coming out of NPR about more effective sunscreens overseas. We've talked about this quite a bit, but article from NPR basically saying the sunscreens in the U.S. kind of suck. And then another article coming out of the beauty industry about how private equity essentially killed the company Beautycounter, the beloved clean beauty brand, they call it. And it's a kind of a deep dive into the skincare industry. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to be talking about things that could be damaging your skin barrier coming from a one Dr. Barbara Sturm. And then finally, what it's like to be a doctor or any salesperson in general while still having a heart. That's just more of a reaction to a video I saw online. I want to talk a little bit about it because we encounter these things in the office every day. So let's jump into it.
First off, shout out to how horrible Apple products are, Apple computers. Why do they not have the big USB port? You have an adapter for everything, and that's why my camera is not working for those of you on YouTube. I have a plug for a plug for a plug, and invariably it fails. After that, the product of the day on a more gentle tone. This is actually a shout out to a Dr. Shah OG. So I've been doing this.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, still one
stuff.
of my favorites to this day. You know, it's really actually hard to find a replacement for this product. I've tried. So what product are we talking about?
This is for those of you listening, this is a Biossance Squalane and Marine Algae Eye Cream. And I am not a monstrous, demonstrative eye cream lover. I am not as sold on the utility of these. However, this is one of the most calming, relaxing, soothing products. I've been trying out a lot of different products. You know, the skin around your eyes, on the lateral part of your eyes, just gets raw sometimes from a sunscreen, I think, this time. But I'm with you. This calmed it down. This is not irritating. This was as gentle as can be, as aesthetic and textured, and a textural experience as I could have ever hoped for. So shout out to Biossance and the Squalane Marine Algae Eye Cream.
Yeah. One of my favorite eye creams, just incredible texture to it. I think functionally it works extremely well, and I can't really pinpoint the ingredient that's driving that because it's not any of the common culprits, right? There's no caffeine.
Right.
It's potentially the algae, the marine algae that they described there has a lot of benefits. And we've kind of talked about that a little bit before, but still one of my all-time favorites. My product of the day is simply the Vanicream Gentle Facial Cleanser. You know, I think Vanicream doesn't get enough love on our channel and on social media in general, but this is a dermatologist's favorite brand. You know, we don't really talk about it a lot. It's free of really all common allergens and very minimalist ingredient list. No fragrances ever. I would say of all the brands that are out there, it has the strictest formulation guideline, which is good for us. We can kind of recommend it confidently that it is not going to irritate the skin, even if you have super sensitive skin. And so, you know, I think, and it's actually a nice experience overall. Like, even though you would think, okay, this is, you know, free of common allergens, it's got a nice foam to it. Leaves you clean without overly stripped. It's just a good overall cleanser for those of you who have sensitive skin. So just shout out Vanicream's Gentle Cleanser.
Yeah, and so before you feel like I stole your idea, I'll have to post this video now. Unsexy skincare products that work. It's basically the Vanicream line. I shot a video just saying just that much. You can pick up any of these Vanicream products, and it is that's clean beauty. From a dermatologist perspective, Vanicream is a clean product line, because if you are looking for something that's free of allergens and irritating ingredients, I mean, that's the one. That and CeraVe probably, but Vanicream even more so.
Yeah, I think Vanicream probably first. Number two, probably CeraVe, strictness of their formulation. So always a safe bet. Now let's talk about any quick life updates from you at all.
Yeah, my air conditioning is working. It's spun up for about an hour.
What was that thirst trap you posted on Instagram? I saw it. You definitely sprayed yourself with water. There's no way that was authentic sweat.
Dude, it was 88 degrees in the house for 4 days maybe. We had friends help us out. one of the nurses' husbands here actually owns an HVAC company. And I mean, very thankful for friends, relationships. They got us the part in this thing fixed in like 4 or 5 days. Otherwise, the repair company was coming in a month.
Wow, that would have been brutal. No, literally my wife would have died. Like, she keeps the temperature at like 62 degrees year round.
Yeah, I love it.
At night. So at that temperature, I think it would have been game over. We would be in a hotel probably, ultimately, which would be sad. So I'm glad you stuck it out. But I saw that video and I was like, here we go. Dr. Maxfield thirst trapping all over social media again.
Oh,
those of you who haven't seen the video, go check it out.
Unintentional.
Me, personally, I was in France again. Still on a hunt for a good meal, I'm just saying. So I was at the VivaTech conference, which is if anyone's in tech, the CES is like the big US conference for tech and tech innovation. I was at the VivaTech conference and I was talking about basically leveraging social media and the creator economy and what that looks like. And we were on stage talking about the creator economy with some of the people from Instagram, like the people that work at Instagram, not people that are on Instagram. And then Nikki Tutorials, who's a really well-known makeup artist. She's from the Netherlands, I believe. And anyway, so we presented this. It was a pretty cool thing. And then spent a little, maybe 3-4 days in Italy, which food delicious, of course. And then now I'm back. But yeah, I cannot do travel anymore. It really kind of wipes me out, quite honestly. So I'm glad to be home again. That's my quick life update. And then for those of you who are following the Remedy story, we are very close, by the time this airs, very close to selling out of Remedy for body bumps again. And for those of you who want to know what this product looks like, this is the product over here. So Remedy for body bumps, very close, moving a lot. Demand is higher than anticipated, and we are going to be out of stock for a very, very long time after this one goes out. So thank you for everyone who purchased the product. I hope that you love it, and I hope that you're seeing results for all of those KP issues through the summer. Now, let's get into our first article where we're going to be talking about sunscreens and why. And this is the time of the year where like sunscreen is, you have to find your sunscreen for the summer, because this is when people are going to start burning again, especially if you're in this hemisphere. So let's talk about this article coming out of NPR. They basically are saying other countries have better sunscreens, and here's why you can't get them in the US. So let's talk briefly about why we have bad sunscreens in the US and why we can't get better ones.
Yeah, it seems to be an effort issue or an attention issue. And you're like, there are a lot of things going on right now. Is that really the priority? But they've had decades to do this. The American sunscreens, they fall into two categories like most, but ours include mineral, which is interesting because that's actually a category that seems to be unique to the American sunscreen company filters. They are casty, they are thick. Some can be pretty darn good, but they are usually heavier than your chemical counterparts. The chemical sunscreens in America have been around a long time, so they feel antiquated. Enough time has lapsed that some of them have been put under the microscope, and questions have arisen whether that is accurate or not. They've just been around for a long period of time, and so as as other countries come out with new filters, the question begs, are they more effective? Are they more elegant? And then perhaps, are they more safe? But for the last question, I'd say only time will tell.
That is a good question. I do think that we have this concept that it would be safer to use these new ingredient filters that are available overseas, and that may very well be true, but time always says that maybe that's not the case, right? We've talked about this a million times before, but parabens, right? Parabens were demonized pretty much by every clean beauty brand in the world. Hormone disruptors, et cetera, et cetera. Turns out that parabens, depending on what type of paraben you're dealing with, are usually pretty safe. And they replaced these parabens, which were being used functionally as preservatives and skincare ingredients, with other preservatives. And then those preservatives turned out to be more common allergens and caused more problems. Then they removed those and went to other ones that then emerge as allergens. And so basically what ends up happening is that everyone always thinks what's new is safer because they just don't have enough data yet to show that it's problematic. And then once everyone starts using that new ingredient, we find out maybe it's not as safe as we once hoped it was, right? And that same thing could happen with these sunscreen filters. Now, because they're being used so frequently in Europe and Australia and maybe not Australia, but definitely in Korea, maybe there's enough use data at this point to say that these are actually truly safer ingredients and maybe more effective ingredients. But let's kind of dive into this article. They're basically, one of the reasons is maybe it is an effort thing. Maybe it truly is an FDA thing. It seems as if a lot of people, especially the Korean skincare brands, would benefit tremendously from changes in this law. And it appears, so one of the reasons why we don't have great sunscreens in the United States is because it is regulated as a drug. So anytime something is regulated as a drug, it is monitored by the FDA. The FDA is determining which sunscreen filters that we can use as an active ingredient in your sunscreen. Same way that acne medications are regulated as well. You have your sunscreens and they're regulated like a drug. And so what you're allowed to use as a sunscreen filter in the United States is very limited to what is on the FDA monograph. And that FDA monograph has not been updated in like 40 or 50 years. Now, they've tried to submit legislation to update that monograph, but it has not been updated. So the filters that are available overseas that are used in Korean sunscreens, that are used in sunscreens in Europe, are not approved to be used as sunscreen filters in the United States. One of the other issues is that sunscreen filters in the United States have to be tested according to this law from 1938, which I actually didn't know about this, that it has to be tested on animals in order to be used in the United States as a sunscreen filter. So according to NPR, the Food and Drug Administration's ability to approve sunscreens is hamstrung by a 1938 U.S. law that has required sunscreens to be tested on animals and classified as drugs rather than as cosmetics, as they are in much of the world. So one of the limitations is animal testing, apparently, which I wasn't aware of. And then the other limitation is they just have not updated that monograph to include newer sunscreen filters that are available overseas. And one of the reasons why these products are better, according to this article, and according to a lot of literature that's out there, is that most of the sunscreens in the United States don't have good UVA protection. Most of them have very good UVB protection, but UVA protection, and within the UVA spectrum, the part of the spectrum that's most responsible for aging, that part of the spectrum is not well covered by U.S. sunscreens. Now, physical sunscreens can block it decently well, but you can't get really high SPFs unless you're super casty. And then probably avobenzone, I believe, has some good UVA coverage. But outside of that, and avobenzone needs to be compounded with other ingredients so that it's a little bit more stable. It's a limiting ingredient. And basically, they're saying that there are better sunscreen filters in Europe, such as Tinasorb S, better known as Tinasorb S, but has other names, goes by other names as well. And there's a company, according to this article, that's working on getting approval in the U.S. for Tinasorb S. And they've spent $18 million so far trying to get it approved in the United States. They believe it's actually going to be available next year. And so maybe we are going to see Tinasorb S, which you see in La Roche-Posay's UV Immune 400, very popular product. I believe it's also in Beauty of Joseon, may or may not be. But Tinasorb S, if it becomes available in the US, has very, very strong UVA coverage as well as UVB coverage, and is considered to be a very safe ingredient as well.
Right. And so that was all on the second part of effectiveness, and really like the enhancement that some of these new filters have in that domain is they have better UVA protection. And I think an interesting thing is when we were in medical school, well, not residency, actually, it was, remember, like eCampsule? Like I made this little memory list of like, okay, so here's the ones that block UVA. It's avobenzone, eCampsule, and then there was one more, which, that was a million years ago. But yeah, the other name for that being Mexeril. So like, it's funny, I didn't put the two together until I think last year that eCampsule and Mexeril are the same product. Even though we learn about it in our American textbooks, we don't actually have access to it. So yeah, and I was just looking at the box because this La Roche-Posay Anthelios UV Immune 400 lights out, super good. However, I'm going to make this short point. I was playing with sunscreens, American versus European versus Korean. And if you just blind yourself, I just played with it. I blinded myself to the products and I put them on a plate and then I applied them. Aesthetically, the U.S. chemical filters are pretty comparable. I think there is this subconscious thing that you're like, oh yeah, this is elegant, this is classy, this is like a worldwide travel experience. For example, the La Roche-Posay Antelios UV Dry Daily Invisible Sunscreen, long name as always. Showing the box for those of you watching.
Yeah, UV Hydra is great. UV Hydra is
So
a
good.
great sunscreen, and US Filters, Rocks AM Moisturizer, great sunscreen. The Naturium product of the day I had the last week, the Dew Glow Moisturizer SPF 50. This is a chemical sunscreen, US Filters only.
Good.
Pretty elegant sunscreen ultimately. So I would actually argue, yeah, maybe we're a little bit harsh on those sunscreens. And I do agree that they don't get as much UVA protection probably as like a Tinosorb S would.
Yeah. But so there's the conversation around that. The FDA, hopefully we get some movement on it over the next year. We'll see. Never optimistic. When it does, I'm excited because it's going to get people excited, and then they're going to wear sunscreen. And that's something that's always a win for us as dermatologists.
1000%. So the reason why is, like I said, it's because the FDA is involved. Anytime the government's involved, it's always a mess. And then eventually these things will change. So, and I do think we're a little bit harsh on US chemical filters. I think most of them work pretty well. And the only ingredient that you and I have advised people to avoid would be a 1-oxybenzone. And as new filters get approved, just always be cautious to understand that, like, maybe they aren't truly safer, right? Just always keep that in the back of your mind that, you know, as you use a product for a very, very long time, you learn everything about it. So, you know, for the sunscreen filter has been on the market for 50 years, everything bad that could have ever been reported about them has now been reported about them. And as that evidence mounts, it always seems like it's worse than maybe it potentially is. But then the newer products are not always going to be better. So let's move on to our next article, which is from Fast Company. And the title of this article is From $1 Billion to Broke, How Private Equity Killed Beautycounter, the beloved clean beauty brand. I'm curious in the comments, if you're watching on YouTube, how many of you have used Beautycounter? Are you familiar with the brand, and whether or not you liked any of the products ultimately?
Yeah, and I have not. So yeah, this article, you know, this maybe preceded me at this brand's peak. I'm not sure. Maybe it just never came across my radar while it was at its prime. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with this specific brand, but the private equity story is always an interesting story across platforms, whether it's like in our medical profession, whether it's in cosmetic space. But so how did they screw this up, basically? What happened to this brand when PE got involved?
Yeah, so, you know, this is the challenge with PE, right? And, you know, it's not uncommon, right? So little background on this brand, and the reason why you probably have never heard about it on social media, even though they were doing massive amounts of revenue, is because their marketing strategy was not like a traditional marketing strategy. They weren't trying to go after people on social media. It was really more targeted towards a pyramid scheme type of, what do you call them? MLM, multi-level marketing.
Oh,
type
my gosh,
of
my family
brand.
loves those.
Yeah. So Beautycounter had salespeople that would sell the products kind of like door to door on their social. And, you know, kind of the basis of the brand was like more like one of the early kind of clean beauty brands where they kind of focused on ingredients, which ingredients they didn't include in them, which ingredients they did include in them. You know, we obviously are not huge fans of the concept of clean beauty, but, you know, it's a very effective marketing strategy. You know, fear marketing works really well. Fear marketing works even better when you have an MLM structure and you're able to sell in this function. So this is also why we don't hear much about, you know, Rodan and Fields. This is also why we don't hear much about, like, what is it, Avon or one of these other ones, is because like they don't, you know, they kind of market person to person, and they work kind of in small groups, and they don't do a lot of these big social media campaigns because, you know, the structure is a little bit different. And so that's the type of brand that it was. Now it's very, very effective, and they had the principles, you know, I guess, you know, Greg Renfrew, who was the founder and CEO of the brand, her function is that, like, her thought was like, you know, she didn't like that all these ingredients were in skincare products, and was like, really, you know, okay, I'm going to make this brand that you could trust and we could know what ingredients are in it. Okay, fine. So she starts this company, and she identifies 1,800 potentially harmful ingredients, quote unquote, and then decides not to formulate with those, and then basically kickstarts this beauty company called Beautycounter, right? Then she has this army of sellers, multi-level marketing strategy, does extremely well. According to this article, a handful of top sellers were making up to $1 million a year. So some of the people in the like some of the sellers, you know, the ones who are like convincing you to buy the products and also sell the products, some of those people were making more than $1 million a year, and people were doing extremely well. Okay, so then move on. She eventually exits from Beautycounter, and they had put about like $100 million into the company before that, and I think they ended up selling the company for like $1 billion. She ends up leaving the company, and they had valued the company at $1 billion. She ends up joining, like being part of the acquisition, ends up leaving the company. They put a different CEO in its place. They try all kinds of different things. They just are losing ground. They're losing their principles. They're losing like essentially like what the brand was built on. And then eventually one day they hire her back. So she's the CEO. She leaves the company. She comes back to the company. And within a few months of her coming back to the company, she came back and like fired everybody. And then the company went into essentially bankruptcy. So it went from like $1 billion valuation and within a few years down to basically zero, bankruptcy. And now she's potentially in the process of buying the entire company back. So she may come back and try to rebuild this company from the ground up. But the question is like, is the trust going to still be there? And I think this is a larger conversation of what happens when private equity gets involved in any company, right? Like they buy a company because they think that they can bring more profitability to that company. And by bringing more profitability to the company, they cut costs a lot of times. So a lot of the core values of the company go down. A lot of the quality of the company goes down. And on top of that, a lot of times when a company is acquired, a lot of the people who were driving the vision of the brand, they also leave, right? And when they leave, the company culture suffers, but they're also, the company vision suffers. So they don't really know a good path forward. And then on top of that, they bring in all this new admin staff that adds to like the overhead to run the company. So now the company is less profitable. It has less vision, and you've also lost the core values of the company. So eventually you lose the customers, right? Now there are companies that have been very successful when they sell, and the company that acquires them actually does take them to the next level. Like, for example, Rock was acquired by private equity, and they basically resurrected the brand after it was purchased from Johnson & Johnson and grew it, leaning in more to the core values of the company when it first started. Mm-hmm. So there are people that do it and execute it extremely well. And then there are people that buy companies and they execute it extremely poorly. And then the company goes to essentially zero, which is what you saw with Beautycounter.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, private equity, you know, there is the admin. Like you add in like 10 other, you create 10 jobs by creating more work, and they just try to pull money from the company and they may offer little to no value. That is definitely one side of it, and then definitely robs the individual creator of the brand from, I think, the vision and direction. Now, I'm with you though. You see brands like L'Oreal. Like, I am always amazed with the success L'Oreal has with their brands that they acquire. And I think a part of it is just what you said. They lean into the brand's heritage. They lean into the brand's vision. And it seems that they help them grow within their respective fields. So, you know, I think there's a way to do it. And in medicine, I think with more and more regulation, more and more busy work that's being created, there seems to be a need sometimes for people to just eat up some of that busy work. But yeah. So, I mean, I do applaud people, I guess even the creator here, even if I don't agree with her vision necessarily, like retinol is on her never list, and that's actually going to lend to the next segment. But I do applaud people for that, for creating something that's reflective of whatever they're passionate about. I think that's respectable. And then again, now she has a whole new battle, the same battle she fought before to get this going. She's got to fight it again. So we'll see what happens with her. And I do wish her good luck, believe it or not, even though I don't have a strong opinion about her company and her personal vision. I do like seeing people succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, everybody has their own value system, right? Like, I think the way that I was trained and the way that we're trained and the way that we talk about information. It's very science backed. It's like, what's in PubMed? What is the research shown? What is like the clinicals showing? Like, what have we seen in our patients? Like, what's worked, what's not worked, right? Like, this is kind of like how we interpret information. Then we take that information and we tell people like, hey, these are our values. And like, this is what we think works based on our knowledge. And then you decide as the consumer of that information, like whose information you trust, like which values do you want to ascribe to, right? It's like anything in life, right? It's like, what values do you ascribe to? And you kind of listen and follow along with the people whose values you ascribe to. And like, I think if anybody has been following Dr. Lee for the past 4 years, you've kind of learned what our values are. And you've decided that if you've been following along and sticking with us through the years, you've decided that you agree with our values, at least some of our values or most of our values. Otherwise you wouldn't stick around. I think kind of the same thing is true of Beautycounter, right? Like, they have their values, and we may not agree with their values and probably don't agree with most of their values, honestly, like, because our values are not in line with their values, right? So we're not going to be consumers of Beautycounter. But if you're Beautycounter and you have this audience who is ascribed to your set of values, right? They're probably not going to ascribe to our set of values, the Dr. Lee set of values, but they have their values. Now, you can't deviate from those set of values now, because your audience will be the first to leave you, right? Like, suddenly, let's say that Beautycounter, like, let's say that they're anti-retinol, and then they come out with their a retinol product because it's popular, right? Then the brand sort of lost its core value, right? Now we would be like, great, like they have a retinol product. We love retinol. Retinol is like all my products, right? So we would be like, great, but then their core audience, right? They betrayed essentially their core audience. The people who ascribe to their values are now going to be like, hey, you kind of betrayed us. And so that's the challenge of like any brand who tries to pivot what they're doing because it's popular at the time. You're going to lose your core audience, and you have to decide whether or not that's worth it for you. And then also, I think private equity, you have to choose your partners wisely, right? It's tempting, like a lot of people, like since we launched Remedy, like a lot of investors have actually reached out, probably like weekly, investors are reaching out for the brand. And, I'm looking at some of these investors and their portfolios and, deciding like, do I want to take investments from, these venture capital and PE firms. And I'm like, I don't need that right now. So I'm like, let me kind of hold off. But ultimately, like, you have to choose your partners wisely and make sure that like even the investors in your company are aligned with your values, or at least they ascribe to your vision. Mm-hmm. Because if they don't, then you're going to lose like the core audience. Right. So, trying to maintain that control is challenging. And so now, what happens with Beautycounter when their business model is structured on their sellers, actually the most important asset to them is actually the people in the MLM who are their sellers, right? Like they need to keep them engaged. And according to this article, those people feel very betrayed. So by the way that the company basically like kind of fired everybody and they all lost basically their livelihoods. Now they're like, why would we go back to this company who basically did this to us or whatever? So now they have the challenge of rebuilding kind of over again, right? So it's like for most brands, it's like the people that are buying the products. For a brand like Beautycounter, it's like the people who are selling the products, and they have to kind of rebuild from there. But I think it's a tale of private equity, and we see it time and time again in dermatology offices as well, because a lot of dermatology offices are acquired by private equity. And in that process, some do very, very well. Some there are actually some decent PE firms that acquire dermatology offices, and they stick to the core values of what a dermatologist would want to do with their patients. And then there are some who just completely betray basically everything that is patient focused. And so you have to choose your partners wisely. It's not like it's a bad thing. It's just that it's something that you have to tread cautiously, because the dollar signs, I think, attached to a lot of these deals can be tempting, but a lot of times you lose the vision in the process. Mm-hmm. All right, let's jump in really quickly here to this damaging your skin reel over here. And we should probably listen to this whole podcast and kind of dissect it here, but this is Barbara Sturm on, I think, the Gary Brecka podcast, basically talking about how, acids and retinols and all these ingredients are like awful for the skin. And, I think this is kind of tangentially related. Barbara Sturm, who is not a dermatologist, but like an orthopedist or something like this, has a skincare brand called Dr. Barbara Sturm. Very expensive products available at Sephora. Has been pretty successful, and was recently just acquired, I think at the end of last year. And now she's talking about how like her basically her ethos essentially is like anti-retinol, anti-exfoliating acids. And in exchange of that, she has like a $200 or $300 hyaluronic acid product.
Do you want to just play it and then we'll just overlay that clip here?
Yeah, let's play the clip.
Let's roll the clip and then we'll actually put the audio in here for you. So I'm going to turn it on. Let me let it rip.
Some of the unknown dangers about what's out there in the skincare world.
Retinol is one of the products, ingredients, which cause inflammation, a destruction of your skin barrier. There's so many things wrong with using that. I mean, like, would you throw acid peels on your kidneys? We do all these things to our skin and we think it doesn't matter. It does matter what we put on our skin.
These poor young girls are going into these big box retailers at very young ages. They're applying all of these chemicals and hormone disruptors to their skin.
Because these lip balms have really scary ingredients, and you put it on the lips and then the kids eat it.
Sunscreen pulled from the market for cancer-causing properties.
Everybody tells you, use sunscreen 24/7. Of course because you destroyed your skin practically.
Right.
So it's actually better if you...
Okay.
So even the audio, the music in the background is like terrifying, right? So you watch that and you're like, what? Retinol is bad for you? This is a doctor that's saying this. Exfoliating acid's horrible for sunscreen? Don't use sunscreen. Now we have a doctor, one Dr. Barbara Sturm, who's saying like, these are horrible for you. So now you get worried like, oh, am I going to ascribe to the Dr. Barbara Sturm view of the world and the view of skincare? And if you do, then maybe you buy her brand. And then maybe if you don't, you buy another brand, right? But she's very anti-retinol, very anti-exfoliating acids, and it sounds like maybe even anti-sunscreen a little bit here. And somebody was apparently saying that she was also anti-vitamin C at one point until she came out with the vitamin C. I don't know if that's true. But ultimately, I think fear marketing sells extremely well. And I think, and this is one of the challenges too, like even with our brand is like, saying what our values are almost like you're almost like negging people that do the things that you are saying you don't do, right? So like, for example, we don't use fragrance, right? We don't use essential oils in our products, right? So by saying like we don't use common allergens and common fragrances and things that kind of irritate the skin, are my fear-mongering marketing people, I think those are my values, right? Like you said, like clean beauty for a dermatologist would be products that don't irritate or cause allergy in the skin. And so for us, like our values are there, her values are like these other ones. But the issue is that we believe probably our values are based on science and truly like on clinical experience. Whereas like retinol and exfoliating acids, if used properly, and all this comes with the caveat of like when these products are used properly and these ingredients are used properly, they're going to be safe. But, of course, if they're not used correctly or maybe she's talking about young kids using these ingredients, then that's probably a bad idea. But if you're the appropriate age, you have the appropriate issues you're trying to treat with these ingredients, and of course, sunscreen is super beneficial. So I'm not a huge fan of like fear mongering if the fear mongering is not based on science.
Yeah, so that whole thing was an interesting take. And again, she wasn't necessarily this one speaking for the whole point. But you brought up a few points. One, she has a sunscreen. So like her position must involve more than just like sunscreen is dangerous because she has a sunscreen product. It does have some European filters in it. So there's that. Like there's definitely more to the conversation even from her perspective. But then there's the retinol perspective too. They mentioned teenage girls, young individuals using this product. I think thankfully the professionals even on the social space have come out and said, yeah, you should not be using these anti-aging ingredients at that stage in your life. It's not a good deliberate use of them pretty universally. I don't think I've seen any divergence from that. But the thing is, if you're using these thoughtfully and deliberately, a lot of these ingredients have a functional purpose. And it always comes back to me to tea tree oil. We did this debate that we never aired. We found that we're both actually fairly good debaters, and we would just take a side and argue it. It was one of the best times ever.
We need to
It's
bring this
always-
back. So basically,
We
for those of you who
do.
don't know, the concept of this was like one of us would pick a side, and it wouldn't be like what we truly believed, right? It would be just like a side in an argument. And the argument is like debatable, right? Like it's something that like someone could argue for or against sunscreen. And I take the side of for sunscreen, Dr. Maxfield takes the side of against sunscreen, and we kind of present the data that would make one believe, and then we kind of let the audience decide based on what we presented. And we should probably bring that back, this sort of idea of derm debates. But we had an argument about tea tree oil, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree that we should take. I actually think we have the capacity to do it now and do it well. But the conversation here was on tea tree oil. I was in the position for it. You were in the position against it. And my position was it has a deliberate use. It's well studied for a plant-based ingredient, blah, blah, blah. Your position was it's actually been lethal to at least a single animal, but there has been evidence it's lethal to animals even with topical use. It's definitely toxic when you ingest it, and therefore it's dangerous. And I use this analogy almost every day in my office because it draws a parallel to safety. People feel safe with tea tree oil. People don't feel safe with chemicals like retinol. However, there is a way to use them appropriately, correctly. Both have an upside and a downside. And as soon as I draw that parallel, something clicks. They're like, oh yeah, tea tree oil is safe. Oh wait, but yeah, of course I was never going to drink it. Like that never crossed my mind to drink this stuff. And it does, I think, help them feel more comfortable with the idea of just using ingredients deliberately. And so there's a huge thing. It's obviously something we harp on religiously on this channel. But so when you're talking about retinol, when you're talking about vitamin C, yeah, there's a way to use it. And it may not be for you, but there's definitely a way to use it that can be helpful. And completely ruling these out. And like you said, perhaps fear mongering around their use, I feel like would probably lead to more, it would just lead to less effective skin routines altogether, maybe lead to bad outcomes, maybe lead to just lost money spent, lost time spent. So I agree. I don't think that this is helpful.
Yeah. I think especially like, and we have to kind of listen to the context around the sunscreen ultimately, but
Right.
Retinol and has been shown to be safe and effective, really, truly. And now some people can't tolerate retinol, right? And we totally understand that. But, $380 for a super anti-aging serum from, Barber Sturm, these products, ultimately are so expensive, right? And what benefit are they providing beyond like what a retinol, which is 50 years of data showing that it's incredibly effective for your skin, and these other products, it's harmful to use products that don't work as well, right? In a way, right? Because it's harmful to your wallet or whatever. Maybe it's kind of like a harder harm to quantify, right? But then again, like you might be the listener to this, and you might think to yourself, you know what? Like I actually don't want to use retinol, and I actually want to subscribe to the beliefs of a Barbara Sturm, and you find her argument more credible than our argument. And I think that's the purpose of debate, ultimately, right? So I think people kind of get worked up about like their position, but I think that listeners and viewers oftentimes, especially if they're trying to be critical, the problem is on social media, you get a snippet, that snippet is amplified by other people, and then, a lot of people get scared into not using sunscreen. So there certainly is a danger of misinformation, like especially when it comes to like things that you truly should be doing, like wearing sunscreen. And if someone scares you to not use sunscreen, then it is quite harmful, that information. But, like let's say example of like using retinol versus not using retinol. If you're somebody who does your research and you decide, I don't want to use retinol for whatever reason, you're the one who has control over your own body and your own health. Now, if you decide that you want to use retinol because you like our content, you believe us, you think that we have good ethos, then you're going to use it. So I think the consumers of information are ultimately the ones that decide like what path they want to go down. But at the same time, I think there are certain pieces of misinformation that are super dangerous and actually do cause quite a bit of harm. So I think trying to distinguish between those two is really important. But at least Barbara Sturm is kind of stuck to her thing. She said no retinol for a long time and kind of stuck with that. Where actually I believe Biossance, I could be wrong, but I believe that Biossance used to say no retinol too. And then also changed their value on that, which I'm glad for. And I always think like also like sticking by your guns, not always good. either. At some point, like, you know, we're saying here in this argument, like, hey, like, stick to your values. And if you stick to your values, then your audience will stay with you. I also think at some point, like, having the humility to say, like, we were wrong, and now we've changed our position on it, I think is also important. I think that's important for us too. Like, you know, for example, like, let's say some landmark study comes out that says like octinoxate is horrible for you, right? Then we'd have to have the humility to come out and be like, you know, we're actually like wrong about this one. And I think that's also important. So I think, you know, it can kind of go both ways. I think as somebody who talks about information constantly and you know, research studies, like our opinions, like we've always talked about this in the very beginning, like new information can come out that can humble us essentially. So I do think it's important to be able to like have the flexibility to change your point of view. But I don't know. We'll see. Now that Barbara Sturm's brand has been acquired by somebody else, it should be interesting to see if they introduce any products outside of her ethos and what that does to the brand ultimately.
Yeah, well, I mean, that'll be fun to monitor. It's kind of expensive. I was just imagining the retinol product and the price tag that would come with that. But
there's certain products I want to test, and then I'm like, I can't even stomach that cost. Like $400 is like a lot of money. A lot of money. Like that's like a week of work. Yeah,
that's a procedure right there. So
yeah, that's a tough one to stomach in my mind. But people are buying it. You know, I think they were doing almost $100 million in revenue when they sold. So they were doing quite well. So, you know, there are enough people that ascribe to the ethos to make a very profitable company. So congrats on her success. We don't align with those values. And that's why you're here with us today in our affordable skincare that we always recommend under $100 most of the time. And so thanks for sticking with us. Let us know your thoughts on these different topics today. I covered like kind of a broad array of things, but sunscreens, Beautycounter. I'm really curious to know if anyone's even used Beautycounter. And finally, whether or not retinol and exfoliating acids are damaging your skin. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if my energy was a little bit low today, that's because I'm feeling like off. Malaise, sore throat, headache, maybe fevers even, but Dayquil is holding me down strong.
All right. Well, yes, we appreciate you all always. Shout out your favorite pyramid scheme in the comments. Maybe I can talk us into doing a whole video on our favorite pyramid schemes because I kind of have a personal vendetta against those. My family has fallen victim to those. Friends have fallen victim to those. But anyway, we appreciate you and we will see you next week.
See you next time.